Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tony Hayes, and I'm filling in for Marcia, which I would be impossible to do, but she left me a list. And the first thing on the agenda is our devotional that Larry Kintner is going to give. Come on up, Larry.
Well, good morning, all. Welcome to our monthly meeting. And my reading today is, if Jesus came to your house. You know already, huh? If Jesus came to your house to spend a day or two, if he came unexpectedly, I wonder what you'd do. Oh, I know you'd give your nicest room to such an honored guest, and all the food you serve to him would be the very best. And you would keep assuring him you're glad to have him there, that serving him in your house is joy beyond compare. But when you saw him coming, would you meet him at the door with arms outstretched in welcome to your heavenly visitor? Or would you have to change your clothes before you let him in? Or hide some magazines and put the Bible where they'd been? Would you turn off the radio and hope he hadn't heard and wish you hadn't uttered that last loud, hasty word? Would you hide your worldly music and put some human books out? Could you let Jesus walk right in, or would you rush about? And I wonder, if the Savior spent a day or two with you, would you go right on doing the things you always do? Would you keep right on saying the things you always say? Would life for you continue as it does from day to day? Would your family conversation keep up its usual pace? And would you find it hard each meal to say a table grace? Would you sing the songs you always sing and read the books you read and let him know the things on which your mind and spirit feed? Would you take Jesus with you everywhere you'd plan to go? Or would you maybe change your plans for just a day or so? Would you be glad to have him meet your very closest friends? Or would you hope they'd stay away until his visit ends? Would you be glad to have him stay forever on and on? Or would you sigh with great relief when he was at last gone? It might be interesting to know the things that you would do if Jesus came in person to spend a few days with you.
Thank you, Larry. Those are words for thought. Lois has our information on members and guests that are attending today. And while you're up here, you can also do the treasury.
We have 20 members and 3 guests. I saw somebody sneak in there just a minute ago. Zoom that I just heard didn't know that he was here. So hi, Bob. And so that's our as far as finances, sometimes my glasses don't work. Hold on a minute. We have $1,194.41 currently in our account.
Tell you what, keeping track of money is a gift. I don't have it. August birthdays. And are we doing this a cappella? Oh, Lois, pardon me. Please come on up. Adonna.
Yes, we have birthdays. Is everybody ready for birthdays? We start off on August 7th, and we have two on August 7th. We have Barbara Crater. We have Barbara Crater on August 7th. See, I knew it would do that. August 7th, and we also have Robert Herrick on August the 7th. Is Robert here? Well, he can have his later. Okay, and we have Bonnie Eyre on August 24th coming up. And we have Judy Phillips on August 27th. And if I have missed anybody, please raise your hand. Any newcomer that we don't have on our list? Okay, let's have happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. And many more. Or something like that. Yeah, and many more.
I'm a little shaky in my voice and my hands. I'm not that nervous, but I have a little bit of asthma left over. Things, so that's what it is. Old business. We're going to spend $306.46 toward replacing the outdoor floor mats for the worship center with reserve funds from last year's budget. Excess from 23-24 will help replace broken window shades in the hospitality center. We have a special project in August. The Humane Society has given us a list of wish items, including towels, blankets, newspapers, etc. On Monday, August 19th, we will deliver the donations and interact with the dogs and cats. Sounds like fun. Meet at Chumsey at 12:45 p.m. to carpool to the Humane Society entrance. And it's not that far. I've been over there several times. We've gotten at least one pet from there. Sounds like a good thing to do. New business. We have sent a sympathy card to Sam and Berlin Grubbs, the family of Lou Grubbs. A donation to Chumsey in Lou's memory will help pay the cost for replacing window shades. And this is just a little note to look ahead. In September, we've got a really good program from the volunteer gardeners about fall gardening and water conservation. Also, please watch the church bulletin. We're going to reform the Bible study group, discuss how best to meet the needs of the people who want to come. The date and time that's set for the first meeting is not written in stone about this is where we'll always meet or when we'll always meet. So that's open for discussion. And I hope some of you will give it a try to open up a new avenue in everybody's life. Okay, our guest speaker today is Mr. Waller. Okay. His father was in the Air Force, like mine was, and he was born in San Antonio. But then they moved to Kansas, and he grew up there. He went to St. Paul School of Theology. He was treasurer in that conference. And then when he moved to San Antonio in 2017 to be the treasurer of this conference. It turns out treasurer doesn't quite cover it. He's on the finance committee, the trustee committee, the benefit committee. of the Rio, Texas Annual Conference. And so he's very involved. He's blessed with a 3-year-old granddaughter that lives with him, and we refrain from showing pictures, but I don't know if I can hold out much longer, and he may not be able to either. He's a model railroad HO fan and has a big setup in his house. So without saying anything else, welcome, Kendall. I don't want
Well, I certainly hope you get to feeling better. Thank you. My name is Kendall Waller. As she said, the actual title is Director of Financial Administrative Ministries for the Rio, Texas Annual Conference. I have a name badge on. You can look, it doesn't fit. And so we had to shorten it to make that work. And it basically means I'm the treasurer and other duties as necessary, whatever that might be. And so we cover a lot of ground. I've got a few things here today. I want to check some of my understandings of who you are before we get started, if that's all right. In visiting with a couple folks from the class, I understand that not everybody is United Methodist today in the room. Is that correct? Maybe not? Okay. And some of us may be newer than others in the United Methodist Church. And all of us from some of the conversations may have some confusion about what conference does what. Is that fair? Okay, so we're going to start at the beginning with just a little bit of an explanation of what the various levels of the United Methodist Church are. Then we'll talk a little bit about the recent meetings and how they affect us. And then I have time for question and answers. But at any point in time, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll recognize that, okay? And so the other thing I need to tell you is this is my pre-edited slideshow. I didn't realize that until I got here. And so one or two of the slides I was counting on aren't in here, but we're going to go through them. And the first one was over the word conference. We hear that all the time if you're a United Methodist, right? And the root of that word is the word confer. And John Wesley really believed, our founder really believed, that conferencing together, holy conversation with one another, was one of the means of grace that Christians use to grow closer to God, to closer to one another, and to understand God's calling in their life. And so we were to come together and confer on a regular basis. And so as the church was organized, it's organized around conferences, okay? And that gets confusing in a moment because there's a meeting that's a conference, and then there's a level of organization that's a conference. And the first level in the primary one in the United Methodist Church is the charge conference or church conference. So how many of you have attended a charge conference here at Colonial Hills? Great, we've got some hands. And the idea of that is to come together and listen to what God is doing in our midst. Now, there is some business that needs to be done, and there are a few other things that need to be done. But the idea is for us to get together and confer about what God is doing in our place and time. And so we report to one another things like, how does our attendance look this year over last year? How many people have we baptized? You know, if our job really is to share the gospel of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, to make disciples, you know, how are we doing? Are we making new disciples? And if not, is there a course correction that's necessary? And so that's really the idea behind the charge conference. Now, the next level of organization up are districts. And so this is a map of the 77 counties that make up the Rio, Texas Annual Conference. And these are the 7 districts that we're organized into. And they're color coded there. It's a little difficult to see them all, but there's West and Hill Country, Capital, which is around Austin, Las Misiones, which is where we are, Crossroads, I think it's Coastal Bend, I could remember that, and then El Valle. And so those are the districts. There are 7 districts currently served by 4 district superintendents. And again, the idea is that at least once a year, we would get together as a district and have a district conference or gathering where we would share what God is doing in our midst as a district. And one of the questions that we need to ask there is, what are some things that we can do together that we couldn't as an individual church? Okay. So I was serving as a district superintendent in the Kansas City area. And there's an area of that town east of the downtown area that's most densely populated part of Kansas City. It also has the highest crime rate in Kansas City. And in a single year, we closed 4 churches and the seminary that were located in that area. And it felt to me as a district superintendent like we were abandoning these people. And it also felt like Jesus would maybe call us to be reaching out to those people. So we kept one of the 4 church buildings and we gathered together as a district. And some churches had people that do disaster response, and some people had folks that work with Habitat for Humanity. And these are people with building skills. And they each committed a week to that building to rehab the building. And it had, when we were done, new flooring, new paint, everything. I mean, it looked like new. And someone else got together and found a grant for summer school. And here are all these young people with nowhere to go, and that's part of the crime problem in the area. So we offered summer school in that building and got to know people in the neighborhood. And I had another church that was really good at recruiting and training people for ministry. And I asked that pastor, could you get me 6 people that would lead small groups every week in this church? And we went door to door with folks from other churches until we had enough people to start a worshiping community. And we had a church in the midst of a place that all the others had left. You kind of hear what I'm saying? So that's something you can do at a district level that's hard to do just as an individual church. Here in Las Misiones, we have a group of 4 churches that gathered together in a ministry, primarily to Hispanic folk, called Impacto, led by 4, I think 3 now, pastors who are working together. And each church has sort of a different outreach, but together they meet the needs of the community and they share the gospel of Jesus Christ in word and deed. Okay? And so that's kind of what a district does. And then all the districts together become the annual conference. And so we get together. I work for the conference on your behalf. The conference is simply a gathering of churches. There's around 230 some now. And what do we do together that we couldn't do on our own? And we get together once a year in Corpus Christi mostly. We've gone to McAllen and may go other places in the future. How many of you have attended an annual conference as a representative of your church? We got Dan. You don't count. No, you do. But some others may have. And again, the idea is we get together and we talk about what God is doing in our midst in this year. And so this year, the theme was and we're talking about post this last general conference, a chance to restart, to rekindle, to reignite, to rejoice, to resurrect. All these words as a time of restarting together on a new vision for ministry across this area. And I will say again, when we get together for a conference, part of it is business. We set a budget, we do some of those kind of things, but most of it really is to hear one another and to listen for the voice of God. And we had at least one person that had such a great and inspiring experience that they went back to their local church and they met with their leader because they wanted to be a part of what the conference was doing. That's not actually our goal, but it's neat to know that it was inspiring at that level. And I used to, as a district superintendent, you have some district slots. I would take young people that I thought were going to be outstanding leaders and invite them to come to annual conference. And almost always their response was, I had no idea how much we do together. And so that's why we do annual conference. Now, there are a couple of other levels above that. Sorry, I'm used to pointing this at the screen rather than the back. And the next is jurisdiction. So we're part of a 9-state jurisdiction. That's a South Central jurisdiction. You'll see it on the map there in purple. There are 5 jurisdictions in the US, and they really have 2 functions. And it's going to be more important later, so I'll come back to this. But one is to elect and appoint bishops. And the other is to help in the setting of conference boundaries, where conferences end and begin on that. And so you begin to see a little bit of how we're organized. Now, the next level up is the international church. And here's one of those areas where I don't think about it much and you may not, but who's United Methodist Church? Being, oh, that's a close look at us. So this is the United Methodist Church, 12 million members, 43,000 congregations on 4 continents in more than 100 countries. And so you begin to see, even just from the very beginning, what's it like to have a general conference, which is where we bring everybody together. It is a challenge. Now, you may have heard, we just had the general conference in 2024, but it was actually the 2020 general conference. Did y'all know that? It was scheduled to happen in 2020, but you know what happened in 2020? COVID. Yeah. And guess what? There were all kinds of regulations on who could fly where, and everything was shut down, and we couldn't bring in delegates from across the world for a conference, even if we had wanted to. And so the next, well, could we do it by Zoom? Well, let's think about that, because if we did it 9 to 5 here, what hours would that be in Africa? And so the question became, you know, what would be a time that would be fair for everybody? And we decided to postpone it to 2021. In 2021, travel bans were still in effect, and also in 2022. And so the 2020 General Conference actually happened in 2024. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about disaffiliation at some point, and but I want you to know that that was a critical part of forming how we experience disaffiliation in the United States. So that putting it off for 4 years. Oh, sorry, going the wrong way. And so this was the theme for the General Conference in 2024, and know that I am God. As the bishop pointed out in one speech, you had a name badge, had your name on it, and then underneath it says, and know that I am God. And that was only a little awkward going to the sandwich shop, you know, it's like, no, not me. But anyway, and we gathered together. Now, what goes into a general conference when you bring all these people from all these countries and all these different continents together? What's that look like? There we go. Oh, went past it. There we go. 133 annual conferences represented, 862 voting delegates, but there were at least that many that come as spectators. And honestly, there's close to that many that come from the news media that cover. And so each room, if you have 40 delegates in, you've probably got 120 people in that room. And so we have to set up for that. 1,099 petitions submitted. And so I brought, this is actually one of our annual conference journals. But if you go to general conference as a delegate, you get what's called a daily Christian advocate, which are all of the petitions that are coming before, and you will get 3 books this size. And you get to read them all. Now, in the first couple that come out, there are some redundant ones. You may have 16 resolutions that all want to accomplish the same thing. So part of the pre-work before general conference is calling the people, bringing that together and seeing if we can come to common language and a single petition. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. And it is, if you ever feel like running for a general conference delegation, make sure you have plenty of free time, because they also meet when they meet, sometimes up to 22 hours a day for 14 days straight. And I would submit that's why we make really dumb decisions on the last day. But editorial comment. Another thing you may not have thought about, but here's the way the delegates broke down this year: 55.9% from the US, 32% from Africa, 6% from the Philippines, 4.6% from Europe. And so that's kind of the breakdown. There are 26 plenary sessions, 18 worship services, 4 official written languages. That's English, French, Kiswahili, and Portuguese. And so every day's minutes are translated and written that day and handed back out. And they're also available online. So if you're here, you can follow General Conference daily online. I also should say something about the worship services. Everybody should go to one General Conference just to experience the worship. We had a choir from Sweden one year that I mean, you know, or a children's choir from Africa, or, I mean, it's just, it's exquisite. It's just like unlike anything else. There are 10 languages spoken via interpreters on site. that changes things a little bit. I was asked to speak to the Council of Bishops as my first experience of that. And if you can imagine, like all across the back of this room, that there would be little cubicles with people with headsets on, and everything you say gets translated into multiple languages at one time. And you kind of get the hang of, at the end of every paragraph, you stop and you wait until everybody gets done, then you start the next piece, you know. Well, it also slows down things a little bit in our committees, but in a way that helps us hear one another and hear the voice of God, I would say. So it says there are 14 legislative committees. I met with the General Administration Committee, and that's a committee that does a lot of work on how the church is organized. One of the petitions we had, a simple thing, is that no one would be denied leadership because of ability. It started out in a negative way, that no one would be denied because of handicapping conditions and some other things. And as it went through committee, they tried to make it more positive. But one of the people that was there speaks a Pacific Island language that I'm not familiar with, and got up after the petition was introduced and said, what does it mean? And they tried to explain, and the interpreter was the one that told us there is no word for handicapping conditions in their language. And so for a moment, just think about that as a culture, they make no distinction. So there is no language for that. But one of the people that was a spectator was in a wheelchair, and she asked permission to be recognized, and she rolled up to him and said, they're talking about me, and through the interpreter. And when he got it, he should have been there to see his face. It was like, oh, and he lit up and he gave her a big hug and said, I understand. And so when we gather in this general conference, it really is sacred space. One other thing you may not know, and this I thought was kind of cool, you may not know that we have United Methodist churches in Russia. We also have United Methodist churches in Ukraine, and they are served by the same bishop. Yeah, who wants that job, right? And so he addressed us, and I will say I've been praying about that. How could you possibly do that these days? And that bishop was a man of such grace. Just amazing. It's like God called him for this time and place. So those are some of the things that just are a part of a gathering as general conference. I want to kind of give you a feel for it. I'm going to get the right place. So this year there were three big items that were before us, and you've probably heard of these, but we summed them up as the 3 R's. The removal of restrictive language from the discipline, that's primarily around human sexuality. Regionalization, which we're going to talk about a little bit, and then revised social principles. And those were 3 of the big things that changed this year at General Conference. The first is the removal of restrictive language. I was visiting a little bit beforehand. The first language around human sexuality appears in the discipline in 1972, right after we became the United Methodist Church. If you recall, we were united in 68. And it was a statement brought forward because of violence against same-sex persons. One person dragged behind a car until dead, and some others around, and it was just total, utter violence and pain. And the original statement was, homosexual persons no less than heterosexual persons are persons of sacred worth, valued by God and entitled to civil rights. That got edited with the addition of we find the practice of homosexuality incompatible with Christian teaching. And since that time, for 52 years, that's been one of the primary conversations every time we get together. I need you to, well, I need to tell you, you don't need to know. But in 1973, at 16 years old, I was elected to go to the annual conference for the very first time as a youth delegate. And guess what we talked about? I have attended now more than 50 annual conferences. It's been there ever since. And so it's been a conversation that has over time almost engulfed us. In 2016, when I was at General Conference, I was reading through my big book of resolutions, and one came and it kind of made sense to me It was a motion that we produce materials that would help families when a child came out as gay in their house. But it was followed by, 16 rejoinders as soon as it was seen. No publication from United Methodist Church shall ever include language that no public on the other side. And you read through it and you just feel the intensity of that. And it was driving us apart. In 2016, we made an unprecedented move because since we'd been talking about it this long and it kept getting put off, they asked the United Methodist bishops to leave, to pray, and to come back with an idea of how we would move forward as a denomination. And so they did. And overnight, they were in prayer, and the next day, and they finally came forth with a proposal. And I say this tongue in cheek, no, I love the United Methodist Church, but guess what their answer was? Let's form a committee. We are Methodists after all, but they did. And it was a committee on the way forward. It was intentional about including people on the far ends and all the way into the middle about a conversation about how we could move forward as a denomination. And we had a called session in 2019 in St. Louis to discuss the findings or the recommendations of that committee. The Way Forward Committee had recommended what they called the one church model, a way that we could be in communion with one another, even though we were of diverse opinions across the spectrum. And that was voted down. And there was a more conservative voice, traditional voice, whatever language you want to use, that had a substitute motion that included a lot of punitive language for people that would marry same-sex couples or that would be supportive in some way. And that got narrowly passed. It's just very few votes, but it did. And along with that was paragraph 2553, where basically is if you don't like it, you can leave. And honestly, that was sort of the attitude with which that was introduced. Yes, sir. That was in 2019. And it was set to go for 4 years, that there would be a window through which people who took exception to the position of the General Conference could leave. And it was set by a more traditionalist group as a way for people who were leaned more toward a liberal side to leave. And it was set to, there'd be 2020, and then we'd meet as General Conference and we'd discuss it and codify it again. And then we didn't meet. And then we didn't meet. And then we didn't meet again. And those people who were persuaded this was the utmost of an issue said, well, we're going to leave anyway. And the Global Methodist Church was begun, which is a more traditional understanding, especially around the issues of human sexuality, but around some others as well. And they began to recruit from the United Methodist Church to get people to use 2553 to disaffiliate. And so that's kind of the way it was. 2553 expired December 31 of 2023. And the idea was that you'd have 4 years to talk, be ready to vote, and then you could leave. And so it happened a different way. And I will tell you as a delegate to General Conference, the one thing every church told me before 2016, whether conservative or liberal, doesn't matter. Please don't make us vote at the local church level. Just make a decision, but don't make us vote, because the discussion and vote will split our church. And that's what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. So in the Rio, Texas Annual Conference, we've had 87 churches leave. We have 27 churches in litigation. And these are churches that refuse to have a charge conference, refuse to pay anything, and just said, we're going to leave and we're going to take everything with us. And the basic lawsuit that we filed is breach of contract, that there's some minimums that are due when you do that. And so that is in a nutshell. And I know there'll be questions later, but that is in a nutshell sort of the story of how disaffiliation unfolded. The reality is that the result of that is that many of our more traditional congregations and folks who, especially who feel more militantly about that, have gone on. And so this annual conference, or general conference, excuse me, in that removal of restrictive language is trying to move down the pathway that the bishops recommended in 2019, which is a single church made up of people of different opinions, and we're not going to be pushing a particular agenda in any different case. Now, I've got a slide here in a minute that will give an example of some of the language that's in there, but punitive language was removed. And then there's a little bit more local autonomy that was left. Now, the quote that I had from Mr. Wesley at the beginning that was cut from this particular slideshow is, this is the one that I edited, and then the old one is back here. But it just says the superintendent shall not keep a clergy from performing or force them to refrain from performing same-sex weddings. And it goes on down there. This is what Mr. Wesley had to say, and I think it's important to remember this. On any given situation or issue, United Methodists agree to disagree. To agree to disagree is a Wesleyan value. No man can choose, no person can choose or prescribe for another. Everyone must follow the dictates of their own conscience in sympathy and sincerity. They must be fully persuaded in their own mind and then act according to the best light they have. Every wise person will allow the other the same liberty of thinking which they desire. They bear with those who differ from them. 'Tis certain, as long as we know in part, all people will not see things alike. It is the unavoidable consequence of the present weakness and shortness of human understanding that we be of several minds, in religion as in common life. And then the final quote that gets said a lot: though we may not think alike, may we not love alike? May we not be of one heart, even if we are not of one mind around every issue? That's an interesting thing. The United Methodist Church has remained in communion and in relationship with many other denominations for years. And that's because we acknowledge that we have the same mission, that we serve one God, one Lord. And we may differ even on how we serve communion or something else that split us long ago, but we don't step away from the table. We don't end the conversation, and we don't just kick somebody out. Now I'm preaching, and I'm sorry, get less informational and more passionate, but that's one of the reasons I am United Methodist, think and let think. And so that was really what got passed around those issues. The people called United Methodist are diverse, including age, race, ethnicity, gender identity, religious background, religious training, ability, sexual orientation, political affiliation, and socioeconomic status. The first church I served was a church that had an average attendance on Sunday morning of 50. We could get everybody to come to consensus on some things, okay? The second church I served had 1,300 in worship and around 2,500 in membership. They couldn't agree on anything. I actually had one Sunday school class that protested against another with signs one week. We did resolve that. I wish I'd known in advance they had that plan. But, now imagine that we're going to get 12 million people together. What are the chances we're going to agree on everything? Like zero, right? And so rather than forcing somebody to sign on, this is how I agree, how about we let people say, here's where I stand, here's where I stand, and maybe there's potential for growth for both of us in the conversation between us. And so that's kind of the stand that we're taking. I'm not used to a sound. Okay, I'm going to back up, maybe. So the second thing was regionalization. And you may not have thought about this, but not all United Methodists have the same book of discipline. This is a book of discipline. This is one of the things that we produce when we gather together as General Conference. This is the book of church law and the official stand of the United Methodist Church for the 4 years that it exists. And then we expect it to be changed. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But in this book are several things. In the front of it are the articles of religion and our theology and the constitution of the church. Those do not change. It takes a supermajority of the General Conference followed by a supermajority of every conference in order to change those. Whoop. The second part of the discipline is how the church is organized. And so, what committees we have, who can be on those committees, how people are selected. Have you ever been on a committee? It's United Methodism. Come on, you have been. And there's, a term that that's all in here. This part in the back that has all the beautiful colored tabs in it on mine, those are legal. And a lot of it's about property and some of it's about HR stuff and firing and hiring and some of those things. Guess what? Those rules look completely different in Africa than they do in America, right? And I was visiting with my counterpart in Mozambique. In Mozambique, all land belongs to everybody. It belongs to the people. So if you wish to have a home or something that's yours, you have to actually improve the land every year that you're there. And as long as you continue to improve it, cause it to raise a crop, then you are helping everybody. Now, that's a completely different system than America. Would you not agree? So this back part of the discipline has been different in different countries all along and continues to be. The front part is a little different. So this is my discipline from 1830. So this little book here is just under 200 years old. It was carried by a district superintendent or circuit rider at the time that it was in use. And you can see the difference in size, right? One of the things you may not be able to see, but this is really thick pages. They just moved the discipline to thinner paper so they could get more pages in the same size book. That's true. This book has the same articles of religion in it that this does. Those don't change. The big controversy that year was whether or not we should keep building colleges. You think about how many across the United States, colleges, universities, and hospitals have the name Methodist or the name Wesley. That was a big thing. And the question was a little bit about how should we build higher learning, institutions of higher learning, how should we fund them, and how big a priority should that be? So that's in here. The other thing I was showing them, I really get a kick out of in this book is in the back. Have any of you had somebody go through, maybe they have from your church, go through the process for ordination? And, you have to go to seminary and you have to take tests and you get interviewed and all this stuff. In the back of this are actual certificates that I, as your district superintendent, would just ask you questions. And if you answered the questions correctly, I would sign it, tear it out, and give it to you, and you're an elder in the church. Okay? There's 100 paragraphs in here about what you have to do. It's a page in this. But every year, I've got a collection of disciplines that goes back almost to the Revolutionary War. And every year there's a different controversy. Should we wear jewelry in church? By the way, that was forbidden for a long time in the United States. Can we play cards? That was a big one around the turn of the century. Some of you may remember Prohibition. Use of alcohol was all over those years. We're engaging all the things in the culture saying, where's God in all this? We split over the Civil War. We came back together years later over a common mission. And so this is one of many controversies that we've handled, but it's because we do look at what's going on. So regionalization means that we in the United States will be treated the same as all the rest of the world, and we'll have a local general conference. We'll actually call it a central conference. I know you needed one more conference to remember. And so Africa has done that, Europe has done that, South America has done that for years, but we've always come together for general conference in the US And our partners across the ocean are saying that I don't want to use this word incorrectly because I'm in Colonial Hills, but that's a holdover of colonialism. And that we spend about 80% of our time when we get together, even though we fly people all over the world, talking about things that only matter in the US. And they're saying, why don't y'all do that on your own time? And then let's bring everybody together for these others, which is what we've done everywhere in the world except the US. And so that model is less US centric in a lot of ways. And, we spent a day talking about retirement for United Methodist clergy in America. And it's kind of like, why'd you fly me from Africa to sit here and listen to this? They're not wrong. So that was it. And then the third, the revised social principles. Now I'm going to go ahead again. Like I said, I had this edited. They are not yet available in print. They are available online. And I know this is difficult to see, www.umcjustice.org. And then if you do a search there on social principles, it'll pull it up. This is the first time in years we have revised the social principles. Social principles are simply the part we say, how do we live out our faith in today's world? What's the best way? And there weren't huge changes, to be honest, except changes in language and changes in some recognition of, just a different way of saying it. But there are a few, including a definition of marriage between two consenting adults is the language that was used. For a little context, that was actually driven by our African brothers and sisters who have a huge issue in some of their countries with children being sold into marriage. And they want to make sure that marriage is between two adults and consenting adults. And so that language was driven there. And so it's kind of helpful to know the context of each of the statements, but it's useful to read through them. I had suggested this might be, especially with this Sunday school class, you can go online, you can download, print those. That might be a fun discussion. Just see, where you disagree, where you agree, who you want to send to general conference next year to make sure that never happens again, all that kind of stuff. It's a part of that. The last day, like I said, remember when people are really tired, they make stupid decisions. But general conference made the decision that we would have 32 bishops in the US, down from 36, and that there would only be 6 in the South Central jurisdiction. That's where we are. There's a challenge to that. If you remember, we have all these conferences, and now we have less bishops than we have conferences. And so in our particular conference, it meant that not only would no one be elected, but that we would, one bishop would have to stand aside. And so Bishop Schnase, he's announced his retirement. Bishop Schnase is one of the few bishops in the history of the United Methodist Church that's actually already served 20 years. He was elected young, and that doesn't happen very often. And so both because of that and some other reasons, they asked if he would be the one that would retire, which he did. And then this area will be served, we will share a bishop with the Bishop of Texas, and that's Bishop Cynthia Harvey, and that's her picture there. She begins September 1, technically. She'll be in town next week, and she sent me a list of questions I have to answer this morning. So she's going to hit the ground running in some ways, but we'll work together with Texas. And there's some advantages to that. We share most of the coastline of Texas now. I'm not sure how that's going to help us with insurance, but it ain't going to hurt. So I'm visiting with some folks on that. Bing. Oh, there we go. And so post this general conference, the area in yellow up there, Great Plains Conference, that used to be 3 conferences, Kansas East, Kansas West, Nebraska. Now it is 1. Missouri used to be Missouri East and Missouri West. Now it is 1. Oklahoma and Oklahoma Indian Mission are now working with the bishop in Arkansas. So those will be served by 1 bishop. Northwest Texas, North Texas, and Central Texas are being blended together. And I always forget the name of that. I'll think of it here in a minute, into one conference. And then Texas conference in Rio, Texas will be one. New Mexico is probably going to be working now with Arizona. We're still working out details. And Louisiana is still served by one bishop. So that's kind of the change. That kind of making sense. I don't have a laser pointer, but okay. So we're down to any questions you have, anything I didn't cover. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll repeat it. She's saying, you know, we have a great pastor in Dan Harrington. So Pastor Dan, wave. And we agree. And said, you know, in the United Methodist Church, pastors move from time to time. And I guess the question is kind of what goes into that? What's that process look like? And so excuse me, their input from several places. One is you. So you have a staff parish relations committee, and they get to make a recommendation that we get to see. And if I recall correctly, because it does change from year to year, it's like, we want this person to stay. We would prefer they stay, but it's okay if they go. We would prefer they go, but it's okay if they stay. And we really need this person to move. Okay, so I mean, it's kind of like that. There's a similar sheet that's filled out by district superintendents that has some input like that. And the pastor themselves get to fill out a sheet that's very much like that. I really need to stay. I'll stay, but you know, and then go. And so we gather all that together as a cabinet and we discuss appointments. And we really do look at who has the best gifts and graces for this particular mission field and area. And it can be, it's an incredibly complicated process. Sometimes a pastor's requesting a move because of a child's graduation or something else like that. Sometimes there are medical conditions, they need to be near something special. Sometimes there is a church that, man, this person just totally fits. And so it's making those matches together. Does that help at all? Okay, all right. And then, you know, we do get cards and letters of appreciation or lack thereof from people when we make the wrong call. Other questions you have? It's an awfully quiet group. Why does Louisiana get their own bishop? Just beats the heck out of me. I really don't know. I really don't know. I think part of the reason is that it was just a short while ago, Bishop Harvey was in Louisiana. Now she's in Texas, and it was difficult. You know, she's just getting her feet on the ground here. The new person there, especially with her just leaving, I think that was a decision. But again, jurisdictional conference, there's a jurisdictional episcopacy committee that makes those decisions. Just like your staff parish committee here for bishops. Yes, ma'am. I see. Sure. The difficulty with insurance, she asked about. People who have been in the market for 50 years tell me last year was one of the worst years for insurance, period. And a lot of the companies and a lot of the people that underwrite insurance drew back the amount that they were willing to put on the market because of losses. And so just in our conference, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact numbers here, but over the last 4 years, we had 24 million more in claims than we had in premium. And so whoever was insuring us was losing a ton of money, and that was Church Mutual. In August of last year, Church Mutual called us and said, we're no longer going to insure all the churches in Rio, Texas. And they didn't give us any warning. They did say here are a few that we would be willing to insure, but more than 2/3 they were going to drop. We went to the market trying to find a group insurance coverage, and we couldn't find anybody that would insure us as a group. Brotherhood said no, Guide One said no, Sovereign said no. Philadelphia. I mean, we went to all the big names. So we went to some carriers that put together tiered programs, and we were not able to get the first estimate we got from them came mid-January, and we knew that was too late. And so we asked churches to go to the market themselves. Some saw savings, some saw huge increases, and the problem is that 100% of the premium is due usually in January. And what we've done as a conference, when we had a group plan, is we paid 100% in January, and then we're reimbursed by your monthly payments back. And so we didn't have much warning on that. I sent out, we're going to get anyway, probably this week, guidance that we're getting from a company called Gallagher that's they insure internationally, but they insure nationally. And we're not seeing better signs, really, a little loosening up. So what causes that? We've had more billion-dollar events this year, almost double the average in the 10 years prior. And so losses are huge. It's largely driven by forms of climate change. But we'll see what this hurricane season's like. You know, we dodged a bullet here with Beryl. Debbie is going to hit Florida. We've already got wildfires on the West Coast, and we've had a couple of tornadoes that went across like a whole state. Those are big, big dollar events, and those are the things that drive cost up for everybody. And unfortunately, I can't control any of them. You know, if I was a better disciple, I'd go out on the beach here, you know, and say, stop. But we've also had floods every year that I've been here. And so that's just our challenge. Wind and hail. Texas is #1 in hail damage. You can celebrate that. 1 in 4 claims for hail damage come from the state of Texas in the United States. And so wind and hail coverage is just getting harder and harder to get. So like I said, I've lost sleep over this. I wish I could make it better, but we haven't figured out a way to make that better yet. Yes, ma'am, on the back row there. Yeah, great question. How are the district and the conference dealing with loss of revenue? So that represents about a 30% loss of churches, the number that have left. It represents about 1.6 million in, a little more than that, about around 1.6 million in revenue that left. Of the total, it's about 25%. Yeah. And so, and our challenge a little bit is this is sort of and the right word escapes me, but this is a time of where we're trying to adjust to that change. And if we do it all at once, you know, we go in and, you know, fire 100 people and do a bunch of other stuff, we do as much damage as good. But we have right now, I don't know what your income will be for 2024. So we set the 2025 budget based on 2023 revenue. But now we're free of the 2020 revenue, which was down across the state. And I was looking, somebody asked me about your apportionments. Let me get this right. And so last year's, you had the maximum amount, because we do put a ceiling on no church will receive more than this amount, 16% to $12,000 increase. 2025 is projected right now as a 10% decrease over 2024. And that represents being able to, at the 2024 annual conference, have the actual numbers of the churches that left and being able to budget for 2025 based on that number. And so how we set apportionments, just real briefly, is 10% of the operating expenses of our churches in aggregate. So prior to disaffiliation, our aggregate operating expenses were in the 85 million range, and we had a budget of 8.2 million, 10%. After disaffiliation, our operating budget is going to be in the neighborhood of 57 million. And our budget this year for 2025 is 5.6, just under 10%. And so we use that to guide us, but we lag a year because I don't have data yet. Does that make sense? So this is a transitional period. And so it went up last year. It's going to go down this coming year as we get set correctly. That help or make it worse? Okay, well, we are watching. Let's see, these are some questions I received from finance people in advance. So while we're there, how much progress has been made on reducing expenses to match lost revenue? We've cut about 1.5 million this year. And part of that staff, part of it's going to be probably the sale of the conference center and a thinking of space. What's the expected trajectory for apportionments? We expect to keep them based on operating expenses of the local church. And so it'll parallel that, but there will be a little bit of time. And then what are ways staff and committees can educate the congregation on what apportionments pay for? Well, yeah, one is, go to annual conference. And, but there is on our website an annual conference piece you can click on, and it lists many of the ministries that we do and where that money goes. At the general conference level, they're similar. You can go to the GCFA website and click on the budget, and it'll show you all the ministries there, and they have pictures and stories and stuff. Others, I can see it's time to go. I see people getting up, so I don't want to keep you all day. Yes, ma'am. No, she had one. You have one too. Go ahead. Okay. Correct. Right. Well, me too. In a nutshell, what it means is that the words United Methodist are copyrighted. The word Methodist is not. So I can control the use of the word United Methodist and the cross and flame. I cannot control the use of the word Methodist. It depends. So some of the people that left as independent congregations, and so they can name themselves, they can organize themselves whatever way they want. Some left to go to the Global Methodist Church, and sometimes they will have global in the Methodist Church sign out front. They have their own discipline. They had what they call it, constitutional convention where they name that. They have their own apportionment structure, their own appointment structures and things like that. So it depends where they left to go. So one's just Babbling Brook Church, and some's Methodist and kept the same name. So it just kind of depends. I thought we owned the word just Methodist, but we don't. Yeah, well, we should have. Hindsight's 2020, isn't it? Anybody else? Okay, I'm sorry, 12:04, so we're past time. Thank you very much.
And, it's a donation in your name, and I
Okay.
want to thank you so much. And our lunch is at the China Inn, which is, I need a number, an address, 2241 Northwest Military, across from the Castle Hills Church. It's not far. And I hope you'll be joining us for lunch and as our guest, and hope we can all meet there. Oh, sorry. Directions have to be real clear for me. Lynn can't be here, and I found something in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the prophet who was sent to the Israelites who were in Babylonian captivity to serve them. And it really is so applicable for today. It was a time of change, and we're in a time of change. Church, community, country. This is a quote from the Lord. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. In Jesus' name, let's help us remember that God is in charge. Thank you.